When fire destroys a passenger jet at 38,000 feet and the pilot dies from a heart attack, 143 people face certain death. But one passenger has a secret, an 11-year-old girl trained by her late father. Now she must land the burning aircraft alone, or everyone will die. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a beautiful Tuesday morning when passengers walked onto Flight 447. The Boeing 737 was heading to Seattle. Everyone was busy finding their seats and putting away their bags. Nobody paid much attention to the small girl in row 12. Her name was Maya Rodriguez. She was only 11 years old. She had dark hair in 2 braids and carried a purple backpack with unicorn stickers. To everyone watching, she looked like a normal kid traveling alone. A flight attendant named Jennifer came to check on her. "Hello sweetie, are you traveling by yourself today?" she asked in a sweet voice. Maya nodded quietly and smiled. She seemed shy and a little nervous, just like any child would be. "That's very brave of you," Jennifer said. "My name is Jennifer. I'll check on you during the flight. Do you need help with your backpack?" Maya shook her head. She lifted her heavy backpack into the overhead bin by herself. It was hard for her small body, but she managed. An elderly woman sitting nearby leaned over. "Are you going to see your mommy or daddy, dear?" she asked kindly. Maya's face changed for just a second. There was sadness in her eyes. "I'm visiting my aunt," she answered softly. "How wonderful," the woman smiled. "Do you like playing games on your tablet?" Maya nodded politely and turned to look out the window. She didn't want to talk anymore. What nobody on that plane knew was that Maya Rodriguez was different from other 11-year-old girls. She had a secret. A secret that would soon save everyone's life. 8 months before this flight, Maya's father had died. His name was Captain Daniel Rodriguez. He was a commercial airline pilot who had been flying planes for 15 years. Then cancer took him away. But before he died, Captain Rodriguez did something amazing. He knew he didn't have much time left. So he decided to teach his daughter everything he knew about flying. He bought expensive flight simulator software for their computer. It was the same kind that professional pilots use for training. Night after night, father and daughter sat together in their home office. Captain Rodriguez taught Maya how to read all the instruments in a cockpit. He showed her how to understand the displays and controls. He taught her how to talk to air traffic controllers using the right words. Most importantly, he taught her what to do when things go wrong. They practiced engine failures. They practiced electrical problems. They practiced fire emergencies. Over and over again, they went through every possible disaster. "Maya," her father told her seriously, "in aviation, we prepare for things we hope will never happen. A good pilot stays calm when everything goes wrong. That's what separates people who survive from people who don't." By the time Captain Rodriguez died, Maya could do emergency procedures that even some professional pilots might struggle with. She had practiced hundreds of hours in the simulator. She knew how to fly a commercial jet. But she was still just a little girl. She was still sad about losing her father. She still missed him every day. So she kept her flying knowledge secret. She didn't tell anyone at school. She didn't show off. She just quietly carried what her father had taught her. On Flight 447, Maya was that same quiet girl with her tablet and backpack. Nobody suspected anything special about her. The takeoff was smooth and normal. The big jet engines roared to life. Flight 447 rolled down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky. It climbed higher and higher, heading toward 38,000 feet. Everything seemed perfect. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Thompson and First Officer Sarah Chen were doing their jobs professionally. Captain Thompson was 52 years old and had been flying for 28 years. He had thousands of hours of experience. First Officer Chen was younger but also highly trained. They had no reason to think this would be anything but a normal flight. Jennifer came by Maya's seat with a smile. "How are you doing, honey? Would you like some apple juice or a snack?" Maya accepted the juice gratefully. Around her, passengers were reading books, working on laptops, or sleeping. The cabin was peaceful and quiet. But deep inside the aircraft, something terrible was happening. There was a tiny defect in some electrical wires. This defect had been there since the airplane was built. Nobody knew about it. It was too small to see. But it was about to cause a disaster. At exactly 10:47 in the morning, 38 minutes into the flight, a warning light suddenly turned on in the cockpit. "Captain, I'm seeing an electrical fault on the number 2 generator," First Officer Chen said calmly. Captain Thompson looked at the warning light. "Switch to backup," he instructed. Chen pressed some buttons on the overhead panel. The backup electrical system turned on. The warning light went off. Both pilots relaxed a little. Problem solved, they thought. But they were wrong. When the backup system turned on, it sent a surge of electricity through the broken wires. The wire insulation failed instantly. Bare wires touched each other. Sparks flew everywhere. The spark started a fire. Within seconds, flames were spreading through the electrical compartment under the cockpit. The fire found materials that burned easily. Thick, toxic smoke began to fill the space behind the cockpit walls. Suddenly, multiple warning lights lit up on the control panel. Fire alarms started beeping. Smoke detectors went off. The cockpit was filled with urgent warnings. "Fire! We have fire!" Captain Thompson shouted. His voice was sharp with fear. "Fire in the electrical bay," he continued. "Discharging fire suppression system now." He pulled a special handle that released fire-extinguishing chemicals into the electrical compartment. For a few seconds, both pilots hoped they had stopped the fire in time. But this fire was too big already. The suppression system couldn't handle it. Smoke started coming into the cockpit. At first, it was just thin wisps. But it carried the sharp smell of burning electrical equipment. Within moments, the smoke got thicker and thicker. Captain Thompson grabbed the radio. "Seattle Center, Flight 447 declaring emergency. We have fire and smoke in the cockpit. Requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing. Nearest suitable airport." His voice was controlled, but you could hear the fear underneath. Every pilot's worst nightmare is fire. Fire on an airplane at 38,000 feet is a race against time. You have to get on the ground fast, or everyone dies. In the passenger cabin, people started to notice something was wrong. First came the smell. That strange, scary smell of electrical fire. Then came the smoke. Thin streams of gray smoke started coming out of the ceiling vents. Within seconds, the smoke got thicker. Someone screamed. Other passengers looked around in confusion and growing fear. Parents grabbed their children. People started coughing. The flight attendants moved quickly. They had trained for emergencies, but this was real. This was terrifying. Jennifer grabbed the PA system microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and stay in your seats with your seatbelts fastened," she announced, trying to keep her voice steady. "We are experiencing a technical issue and will be landing shortly." But passengers could see the smoke getting worse. They could smell the fire. Some people started crying. Others prayed quietly. Maya sat in her seat watching the smoke. Her father's training automatically kicked in. She knew immediately that this was very bad. This was the kind of fire that brings planes down. This was the kind of fire that kills everyone on board. She felt her heart beating fast. Her hands started shaking. But her mind stayed clear. All those hours with her father in the simulator had prepared her for exactly this moment. In the cockpit, the situation was getting worse by the second. The smoke was now so thick that Captain Thompson and First Officer Chen could barely see their instruments. Both pilots put on their emergency smoke masks, but visibility was almost zero. "We're losing hydraulics," Chen reported. "Flight controls are getting sluggish." Captain Thompson fought with the control yoke. The airplane was responding slowly. The fire was destroying the aircraft systems one by one. They were still 12 minutes away from the nearest airport. Then the fire broke through into the cockpit itself. Flames suddenly appeared between the pilot seats, bright orange and terrifying. Thompson grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it at the flames. But the fire was too big. The extinguisher couldn't stop it. "We need to get this aircraft on the ground now," Thompson shouted. But even as he spoke, something terrible happened. He suddenly started coughing badly. Despite the smoke mask, he had been breathing toxic fumes for several minutes. The smoke, the stress, the fear, it was all too much for his heart. Captain Michael Thompson clutched his chest. A massive heart attack struck him. The pain was crushing. He couldn't breathe. Within seconds, he slumped forward over the controls, unconscious. First Officer Sarah Chen saw him collapse. She reached for him, trying to help. But at that exact moment, she too was overcome by the smoke. Even through her mask, the toxic fumes reached her lungs. She lost consciousness and slumped sideways in her seat. The cockpit was now empty. Both pilots were unconscious or dead. The airplane continued flying forward on autopilot. But the fire kept spreading. Systems kept failing. Without a pilot, everyone on board had only minutes left to live. In the cabin, the smoke was now thick throughout the entire airplane. Flames could be seen through gaps in the ceiling panels. Passengers were screaming, crying, and praying. Some were saying goodbye to loved ones on their phones. The flight attendants tried to keep people calm, but there was nothing they could do. The plane needed to be landed. And there was nobody in the cockpit who could land it. Maya Rodriguez sat in her seat, shaking. She was terrified. She was just a little girl. She wanted to close her eyes and pretend this wasn't happening. But then she thought about her father. She thought about all those nights they spent together in the simulator. She thought about his words, "When everything goes wrong, Maya, you take it one step at a time. Stay calm. You can do this." Maya knew what was happening. She knew the pilots were either dead or unconscious. She knew the plane had only minutes before the fire destroyed enough systems to make it unflyable. And she knew something else. She was the only person on this burning airplane who knew how to fly it. Her whole body was shaking as she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She started walking toward the front of the plane, pushing through the smoke-filled aisle. Jennifer saw her and rushed over. "Honey, no. Get back to your seat. It's not safe." Maya looked up at the flight attendant. Something in the child's eyes made Jennifer stop. Those eyes didn't look like a scared little girl anymore. They looked determined. They looked certain. "The pilots are dead or unconscious," Maya said with shocking calmness. "I know how to fly. I'm going to land this plane." Jennifer's mind couldn't process what she was hearing. This was a child. A little girl claiming she could fly a huge commercial jet. It was impossible. It was crazy. But Jennifer looked into Maya's eyes. She looked at the chaos around them. She knew everyone was going to die anyway. What did they have to lose? Jennifer made a split-second decision. She stepped aside. Maya pushed through the cockpit door. The cockpit was like something from a horror movie. Smoke was so thick Maya could barely see 3 feet in front of her. Flames were visible in several places. Both pilots were slumped in their seats, not moving. Warning lights and alarms were going off everywhere. The noise was deafening. For just a moment, Maya's 11-year-old mind wanted to give up. She wanted to run back to her seat and hide. She wanted her father. But then she heard his voice in her memory. Calm and steady, just like always. When everything goes wrong, Maya, you take it one step at a time. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Always in that order. Aviate means fly the plane. Navigate means know where you're going. Communicate means talk to air traffic control. Maya climbed into the captain's seat. Her small body could barely see over the instrument panel. Her feet didn't reach the rudder pedals. She was too small for this airplane. But she didn't have time to worry about that. The smoke burned her eyes and throat. She forced herself to focus on the instruments. Through the smoke, she could see the flight displays. The autopilot was still on. That was good. But she could see system after system failing on the displays. With shaking hands, she reached for the radio button. She pressed it. When she spoke, her voice was young and high-pitched. But it was clear and controlled. Seattle Center, Flight 447, emergency traffic. Both pilots are incapacitated. I am an 11-year-old passenger with flight training. I need immediate assistance to land this aircraft. There was a long silence on the radio. Maya imagined the shock on the other end. At the Seattle Air Route Traffic Control Center, Controller James Morrison stared at his radio panel in complete shock. Had he really just heard a child's voice declaring an emergency? His first thought was that this was some kind of sick joke. But the transponder code confirmed it was really Flight 447. And that flight had declared an emergency just minutes ago. He pressed his microphone button. Flight 447, Seattle Center, confirm you are a passenger and the flight crew is incapacitated. Maya's response came immediately. Affirmative, Seattle. Captain and first officer are both unconscious. Smoke and fire in cockpit. I estimate less than 10 minutes before fire compromises flight controls. I need vectors to nearest suitable airport and landing instructions. Morrison felt his blood run cold. The voice was unmistakably a child's. But the terminology was correct. Professional. Whoever was speaking knew aviation language. Around him, supervisors and other controllers gathered, staring at the radar screen. This was unprecedented. Impossible. A nightmare. But Morrison made a decision. He would treat this exactly like any other emergency. He would help this child land the plane, no matter how impossible it seemed. Flight 447, understand you have fire on board and need immediate landing. Nearest suitable airport is McCord Air Force Base, approximately 48 miles northwest of your position. Can you execute a turn to heading 320 degrees? In the burning cockpit, Maya looked at the heading indicator. She calculated the turn required. She reached for the autopilot control panel. Her father's training guided her hands. She selected heading mode and dialed in 320 degrees. The airplane began to turn smoothly. Seattle, Flight 447 turning to 320, she transmitted. Confirming McCord Air Force Base. I'll need full emergency equipment standing by. I have approximately 140 people on board. Morrison and everyone around him exchanged looks of amazement. She sounded like a professional pilot. Except for that young voice. Flight 447, continue present heading. Begin descent to 12,000 feet. I'm going to give you vectors for a straight-in approach to McCord's runway 16. It's 13,000 feet long, so you'll have plenty of room. Maya acknowledged and began programming the autopilot for descent. But she realized a critical problem. The smoke in the cockpit was so thick she could barely see the instruments. If she couldn't see, she couldn't land the plane. She reached up to the overhead panel. She found the cockpit ventilation controls. She shut off the recirculation fans and opened the outflow valve to maximum. This created a pressure difference that helped pull some of the smoke out. It helped a little. Now she could at least see the instruments clearly enough to fly. The airplane was descending through 30,000 feet. Maya could see McCord Air Force Base on the navigation display. The distance was counting down, 42 miles, 40 miles, 38 miles. Each mile felt like forever. She could feel the flight controls getting softer and harder to control as the fire destroyed hydraulic systems. Behind Maya, in the cockpit doorway, Jennifer stood watching in complete amazement and terror. She had told the other flight attendants what was happening. Word was spreading through the cabin in whispered disbelief. The 11-year-old girl was flying the plane. Some passengers were praying. Some were crying. But a strange kind of hope was spreading too. Maybe, just maybe, they would survive. Maya pressed the radio button again. Seattle, Flight 447. I need landing configuration guidance. I've practiced this in simulation, but I need to confirm the procedure for this aircraft type. Morrison now had a Boeing 737 operations manual in front of him. He began reading out the landing procedure. Flight 447, at 10 miles from the field, slow to 250 knots and begin lowering flaps to 5 degrees. At 5 miles, gear down, flaps 15. Final approach, flaps 30, target speed 140 knots. Maya's mind raced through her memory of hundreds of simulated approaches. It matched her training exactly. Affirmative, Seattle. That matches my training. I'm 26 miles out now. She paused, then added something that showed remarkable awareness. I should tell you that I'm too short to properly reach the rudder pedals. I'm going to need to land using primarily aileron control. Also, I'm planning maximum auto brake setting. Morrison checked the weather. Flight 447, be advised, McCord winds are currently 350 at 8 knots, so you'll have nearly a direct headwind on runway 16. That should help with directional control. Maya felt a small relief. A headwind meant she would touch down at a slower ground speed. The wind direction meant less crosswind correction would be needed. The fire continued to rage. Maya could feel heat on her back from flames consuming the rear wall. She had to get this plane on the ground in the next few minutes. At 15 miles out, she began slowing the aircraft. At 12 miles, she reached for the flap lever and moved it to 5 degrees. The airplane shuddered slightly as the flaps extended. At 10 miles out, McCord Air Force Base was visible through the windscreen. Maya could see the long runway stretching out before her. Along the sides were emergency vehicles with flashing lights. Fire trucks. Ambulances. All waiting. Seattle, Flight 447. I have the field in sight. Canceling autopilot and going to manual flight now. Her hand moved to the autopilot disconnect button. For just a moment, she hesitated. When she disconnected it, she would be truly flying this massive machine by herself. If she made a mistake, there was no safety net. Everyone would die. She pressed the button. The autopilot disconnected with a chirp sound. Suddenly Maya felt the full weight of the aircraft through the control yoke. It was heavier than the simulator. But it responded to her inputs. She made a small correction, aligning the aircraft with the runway centerline. 7 miles out. She moved the gear lever to the down position. The airplane shuddered as the landing gear extended. 3 green lights showed on the panel. All gear down and locked. Good. At 5 miles, she moved the flaps to 15 degrees. 4 miles. She was now committed to this landing. There was no going around. No second chance. She moved the flaps to the final 30 degrees position. The aircraft settled into its final approach configuration. 3 miles. Maya could now see individual vehicles around the airfield. She could see people watching this approaching aircraft with its smoke trail visible from the ground. Flight 447, you're on a perfect approach path, Morrison transmitted. For the first time since this nightmare began, there was hope in his voice. Continue as you are. Runway is yours. All emergency equipment is standing by. 2 miles. The runway was growing larger in the windscreen, filling her field of view. Maya made tiny corrections with the control yoke, keeping the runway centerline aligned. Sweat ran down her face, mixing with tears from the smoke. Her hands were shaking. But she kept them steady through sheer force of will. This was for her father. For all the hours he spent teaching her. This was for all the people behind her, depending on an 11-year-old girl to do something no child should ever have to do. 1 mile. She was over the approach lights now. The runway was right there. A wide expanse of concrete that looked both enormous and impossibly small. Maya pulled the throttles to idle. She began to flare, pulling back gently on the control yoke to raise the nose and slow the descent rate. Her father's voice was in her head. Easy, not too much. Let the aircraft settle. Wait for it. The runway rushed up to meet the aircraft. The main landing gear touched down first. Maya felt the slight bounce as the wheels made contact. The tires chirped against concrete. Then the nose gear came down. The aircraft was on the ground, rolling at over 130 miles per hour. The auto brakes engaged automatically, throwing her forward against her seatbelt. The aircraft decelerated rapidly. The brakes were doing exactly what they were designed to do. 60 knots. 50, 40. 30, 20. And then they were stopped. Sitting motionless on the runway, about 4,000 feet from where they touched down. Maya sat in the captain's seat for a moment, unable to move. She couldn't process what she had just done. Her whole body was shaking. Then training took over one more time. She pulled the engine fire handles, shutting down both engines. She turned off the battery and electrical systems, removing all power from the burning aircraft. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane within seconds. Firefighters deployed foam and water on the flames. Emergency slides deployed automatically. Passengers began evacuating, sliding down to safety. The evacuation was chaotic but successful. People were crying, screaming, hugging each other. They couldn't believe they were alive. Inside the cockpit, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and tried to stand. But her legs wouldn't support her. The adrenaline that had kept her functioning had run out. She collapsed to the cockpit floor, shaking uncontrollably. Jennifer, who had stayed near the cockpit door throughout the landing, rushed in. She scooped Maya up in her arms and carried her out of the smoke-filled cockpit. "I've got you, sweetie. I've got you. You're safe now. You did it." Jennifer was sobbing as she carried Maya down the aisle. Medical personnel met them at the emergency slide. Maya was immediately placed on a stretcher and given oxygen. As paramedics loaded her into an ambulance, Maya looked back at the aircraft. Smoke and steam poured from it as firefighters battled the blaze. The plane was destroyed. It would never fly again. But everyone aboard had survived. 143 people were alive because an 11-year-old girl had refused to accept that death was inevitable. In the ambulance, as oxygen flowed through a mask over her face, Maya finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for her father. She cried from fear and exhaustion. She cried from relief. She had done it. She had landed the plane. She had saved everyone. The story exploded across the media within hours. Video footage from the ground showing the aircraft's landing with smoke trailing from it was broadcast worldwide. News helicopters captured the evacuation. Reporters rushed to the scene. The fact that the person flying was an 11-year-old girl seemed impossible. Yet it was absolutely real. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board arrived that evening. They began interviewing survivors and examining the aircraft wreckage. When they interviewed Maya in the hospital where she was being treated for smoke inhalation, they were stunned. Her technical knowledge was extraordinary. Her calm recounting of the emergency procedures was remarkable. The investigation revealed the full extent of the electrical system failure that caused the fire. A microscopic manufacturing defect in a wire bundle had existed since the aircraft was built. The defect caused the catastrophic failure. Aviation experts analyzed Maya's actions. The consensus was remarkable: she had made exactly the right decisions at every critical point. Professional pilots with decades of experience stated publicly that many qualified pilots might not have handled the situation as well under such extreme pressure. Captain Michael Thompson had died of a heart attack during the emergency. First Officer Sarah Chen survived but was hospitalized for severe smoke inhalation. She would require months of recovery. Maya Rodriguez became famous overnight, though fame was something she neither wanted nor sought. On the one-year anniversary of Flight 447, Maya visited McCord Air Force Base for a memorial ceremony. She was 12 years old now. She stood on the same runway where she had landed the burning aircraft. Beside her stood Jennifer, the flight attendant who had made the split-second decision to let a child enter the cockpit. James Morrison, the air traffic controller, traveled from Seattle to attend. He wanted to meet face-to-face the young girl whose calm voice had been so surreal yet so professional. Dozens of survivors attended. A plaque was unveiled near the runway, commemorating Flight 447. It listed Captain Michael Thompson among those who died that day, but also noted that his legacy lived on through his daughter's actions. Maya placed flowers near the plaque. For a long moment, she simply stood there, remembering her father, remembering the terror of that day, remembering the weight of responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. When she spoke to the gathered crowd, her voice was still young, but it carried gravity. "My dad taught me to fly because he loved aviation and wanted to share that with me," she said quietly. "He taught me emergency procedures because he believed knowledge was the best gift he could give me. He never could have known his teaching would save 143 people." Her voice caught with emotion. "I was so scared that day. I'm not a hero. I'm just a kid who knew how to fly because my dad taught me. And I couldn't just sit there while everyone died." She paused, tears running down her face. "I miss him every day. But I know he would be proud that his teaching mattered, that it made a difference." The crowd applauded, many crying openly. These were people who had looked death in the face and been pulled back by a child's skill and courage. After the ceremony, Maya spoke with many survivors individually. A businessman told her he had been convinced he would never see his children again. Now he was there with them, alive and grateful. A college student said she was now studying to become a pilot, inspired by Maya's example. A young mother thanked Maya through tears, saying her baby would grow up and have a life because of what this 12-year-old had done. James Morrison pulled Maya aside. "I've been a controller for 18 years, he told her. "I've handled thousands of emergencies, but I have never experienced anything like that day. When I first heard your voice, I thought it was impossible. But you proved me wrong." He smiled warmly. "The way you handled yourself on that radio, the clarity of your communications, it was better than some professional pilots I've worked with. I hope someday you'll consider becoming a pilot, because the industry would be lucky to have someone with your skills." Maya smiled shyly. "I don't know if I want to be a pilot," she admitted. "Sometimes I think yes, because it's what my dad did. But sometimes I think that day used up all my courage for flying. I have nightmares about the smoke and the fire." Morrison nodded understandingly. "That's completely normal, Maya. What you experienced would traumatize anyone. Whatever you decide to do, I know you'll do something meaningful." Years passed. Maya grew into a young woman who chose to pursue aerospace engineering rather than becoming a pilot. She wanted to improve aircraft safety systems so other children would never have to do what she had done. She worked on advanced fire suppression systems. She held patents on safety innovations that would save countless lives by preventing disasters before they could occur. But she always remembered that day when she was 11 years old. Sitting in a burning cockpit. Too small to reach the pedals. Too young to be responsible for so many lives. Yet somehow finding within herself the knowledge and courage to do the impossible. She remembered her father's voice guiding her. She remembered the terror and the determination. She remembered the moment the wheels touched the runway and she knew they had survived. Maya Rodriguez, the girl who landed a burning jet alone at 11 years old, carried that identity throughout her life. But it didn't define her entirely. She was many things: a student, an engineer, an advocate, someone learning to heal from trauma and loss. She started a foundation using money from her unwanted fame, providing flight training scholarships to young people who had lost parents. It was her way of taking the darkest moment of her life and transforming it into something that might help others. The investigation led to changes in aircraft electrical system design and fire suppression systems. The specific wire bundle defect was found in several other aircraft, leading to a worldwide inspection program. Maya's story saved lives not just on that one day, but for years to come. And sometimes, on the hardest days, Maya would close her eyes and hear her father's voice one more time. Maya, flying is about more than just controlling an aircraft. It's about making decisions under pressure. Staying calm when everything goes wrong. Taking responsibility for lives that depend on you. These lessons will serve you well in anything you do. I'm teaching you to fly, but really, I'm teaching you to face whatever challenges life brings with skill and courage and grace. He had taught her well. And on that terrible, impossible day, when an 11-year-old girl became the only person who could save a burning aircraft full of people, those lessons had been enough. They had been exactly enough.